In a remote village nestled deep in the heart of an ancient forest, there existed a legend whispered only in hushed voices, the legend of the Karn Pishachini. She was a spirit of the damned, a demonic entity that feasted not on flesh, but on the darkest secrets of the human soul. They said she could hear every unspoken thought, every hidden sin, and once she chose you, there was no escape. That night, the whispers returned. But this time, they were not alone. Ravi, the village priest, sat in his dimly lit temple, reciting mantras under his breath. He had seen the signs, the cold wind that carried voices, the sudden deaths of cattle, the feeling of being watched even when alone. The Karn Pishachini was not just hungry, she was multiplying. As Ravi chanted, his hands trembled. He had read about spirits that could grow stronger by consuming guilt, but this was something far worse. She had fed on Raghav's soul, and now, she was not just one. She was many. A blood-curdling scream shattered the night. It came from the house of Meena, the widow who lived by the river. By the time the villagers arrived, Meena was crouched in a corner, her nails torn off, her eyes wide with horror. She whispered something again and again. "She speaks in my head." Ravi grabbed her by the shoulders. "Who, Meena? What did you see?" Meena's lips quivered, and then, in a voice not her own, she spoke. "I know what you did, Ravi." The priest staggered back. No, it was impossible. Meena's neck twisted unnaturally, her jaw stretching too wide, her tongue black and writhing like a serpent. "You let her die, didn't you?" Ravi's blood ran cold. How did she know? No one knew. 30 years ago, he had let a girl drown in the river. He could have saved her, but he had done nothing, and now, she was inside Meena. A deep, gurgling laughter erupted from Meena's mouth. And then, one by one, the villagers froze in place. The whispers slithered through the air, echoing inside their skulls. She was in all of them. The Karn Pishachini had spread, infecting their minds, reading their sins, feeding on their regrets. No one could hide. No one could escape. One by one, the villagers began to tear themselves apart, scratching at their own faces, ripping out their own tongues, as the voices inside them grew louder and louder. Ravi tried to run, but the shadows wrapped around his legs, dragging him back into the darkness. And as the village of Nandipur fell silent forever, the wind carried the whispers onward, searching for the next town, the next city. Searching for you. Listen closely. Do you hear her yet? For Raghav, a traveling journalist, it was nothing more than a silly superstition. He had come to the village to write about local myths, dismissing the warnings of the elders. She listens through the wind, they told him. She whispers your own sins back to you. That night, as he lay in his bed in the small hut he had rented, the wind outside howled like a wounded beast. Then, suddenly, silence. Then came the whispers. Soft at first, murmuring, breathing, then, clear as a whisper in his ear. "I know what you did, Raghav." He sat up, his heart hammering. The room was empty, but the voice continued. "I know what you hide." His mind raced. Was this a trick? A nightmare? Then the whispers turned into laughter, low, guttural, and sickeningly familiar. It was his own voice. And then, she spoke. "Let me in." The candle flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air grew thick with a rotten stench, and in the corner of the room, something shifted. A silhouette, a woman, hair matted with filth, eyes black as voids, lips stretching into an inhuman grin. Karn Pishachini had found him. "Leave me alone," Raghav shouted, scrambling to the door, but it wouldn't budge. He could feel her presence behind him, breathing in his thoughts. "You lied, Raghav," she whispered. His mind reeled. He had lied, about his past, about the accident, about the girl he had left to die, the guilt he buried deep inside him. She knew, she had always known. "Let me show you what she felt." His bones cracked as invisible hands wrenched him back, his skin burned as unseen claws dug into his flesh, his lungs filled with water, drowning him in a phantom lake just like the girl he had killed. As his vision blurred, he saw her face, twisted, laughing, devouring every last drop of his agony. And then, he was gone. The next morning, the villagers found his hut empty, no sign of struggle, no trace of Raghav, just his journal, open to the last page. Scrawled in trembling letters, "She hears everything." That night, The wind whispered again. And someone else listened. The cycle would never end. The village of Nandipur fell into an eerie silence after Raghav's disappearance. No one spoke of it. No one dared. But deep down, they all knew the curse had been awakened again. The village of Nandipur no longer existed. Not with war, not with famine, not with fire, but with whispers. From the skyscrapers of New York to the slums of Mumbai, people were hearing the voices. At first, just faint murmurs in the wind, like a forgotten memory surfacing. Then, the voices became clearer, stronger, personal. And finally, the screams began. Day 1, the collapse. Governments tried to control it. They declared it mass hysteria, a neurological virus. Some blamed a secret government experiment gone wrong. Others claimed it was a digital infection, spreading through phones, radios, the internet itself. But how do you stop something that isn't real? How do you fight something that lives inside your mind? By midnight, hospitals overflowed with people who had ripped out their own tongues, trying to silence the voices. Police stations were flooded with confessions, murders, betrayals, sins long buried. And then, one by one, the world's leaders started vanishing. Day 3, the last broadcast. The final television broadcast was from a lone news anchor in Tokyo. His hands trembled as he spoke, eyes darting to something only he could see. If anyone is still watching, please, don't listen to them. They know your secrets. They will show you your worst fears. But it's not real. It's not real. Then, the whisper came, a voice from the speakers, a voice from his past. The anchor froze. He began to laugh. Then, with a sickening crack, he twisted his own head backward. And the screen went black. Day 7, the silence. Cities stood empty. The streets were still, the lights flickering. No cars moved, no voices spoke. Only the wind carried the last remnants of humanity, whispers trapped in the air, repeating over and over again. She hears everything. She hears everything. She hears everything. But there was one place left untouched. Day 14, the last man on Earth. In an underground bunker, deep beneath the Arctic ice, a lone scientist named Dr. Vikram Rao stared at his screens in horror. He had watched the world fall in real time, had listened to the endless screams through satellite feeds. But there were no more screams now. Just silence. The Karn Pishachini had won. But something wasn't right. As he monitored the dead world above, his computer picked up an audio frequency, a weak signal bouncing from abandoned cities, underground tunnels, radio towers. He put on his headphones. And then, he heard it. Not one voice. Millions. Not in agony. In laughter. A chorus of mocking, endless laughter, rising and falling like a twisted song. The Karn Pishachini had not just fed on the world. She had become the world. Every whisper, every secret, every regret woven into the very fabric of reality. Vikram's breath hitched, his hands trembled. He ripped the headphones off, but the voices didn't stop. They were inside his head now. You can't hide from us. The screen in front of him flickered. A dark figure appeared on the monitor, a woman, her black eyes staring straight into his soul, her lips stretched into a grin far too wide. We saved the best for last, Vikram! He screamed. And then, the world went truly, completely silent. Or is it? Because somewhere, in the wind, the whispers still linger. And if you listen closely enough, by the time travelers arrived, they found nothing but empty homes, doors swinging in the wind, and the faint stench of decay in the air. Not a single body was found. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. But the truth was far worse. The Karn Pishachini had moved on. 2 weeks later, New Delhi. Arif Kapoor sat in his high-rise apartment, scrolling through news articles about the Nandipur massacre. The reports were disturbing. An entire village vanished overnight. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just eerie writings left on the walls. She hears everything. It was absurd, a superstition, a ghost story, and yet, something about it unsettled him. As he poured himself a drink, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. At first, there was nothing but static. Then, a whisper. I know what you did, Arif. His blood turned to ice. The phone slipped from his hand. The voice had been his mother who had died 10 years ago. Shaking, he reached for the phone, but the static had returned. Then, from the darkened corner of his room, something shifted. A shape, a figure, hair tangled like dead vines, lips stretching into a grotesque grin. The Karn Pishachini had arrived. You left her to die. Ariv's chest seized. He had left his mother alone that night, ignored her calls while she suffered a stroke, choosing instead to party with his friends. No one knew. But she did. She always did. Ariv tried to run, but the whispers exploded inside his skull, filling his mind with screams, voices, laughter, his own voice, his own guilt, twisted into a never-ending nightmare. The city lights flickered. Down below, in the streets of Delhi, others began to hear the whispers. A mother froze in her kitchen, a voice telling her she had poisoned her own child. A businessman collapsed on the subway, his sins replaying inside his head over and over again. A little girl screamed as she saw the thing crawling out of her closet, whispering about the brother she had pushed down the stairs. One by one, the people of Delhi fell to their knees, clawing at their own faces, shrieking in agony. The whispers were spreading. And the Karn Pishachini was still hungry. The final night, by sunrise, the entire city had gone silent. The roads were littered with abandoned cars, offices stood empty, phones rang endlessly, unanswered. The world watched in horror as satellite images showed a once bustling metropolis now frozen in time, its 32 million residents simply gone. All that remained were the writings, scrawled across walls, streets, and bloodied windows. She hears everything. Then, in cities around the world, people started receiving calls from unknown numbers. A whisper on the line. A voice they thought was long dead. And one by one, the world was dying. The world began to vanish. The world had ended. Nothing remained but whispers, floating in the void like dead echoes. But somewhere, beyond the nothingness, a new sound emerged. A heartbeat. The rebirth of reality. Vikram Rao awoke. Not in his bunker, not in a nightmare, but in a new world. He sat up, gasping, his hands trembling against cold, smooth stone. Above him, the sky was wrong, a swirling mass of colorless fog, shifting and twisting like liquid shadow. The city before him was familiar yet alien, Mumbai, but lifeless. The buildings stood like rotting husks, their windows black and empty. The roads stretched endlessly in all directions, looping upon themselves like an impossible maze. He wasn't alone. Figures wandered the streets, faceless, silent, trapped in endless loops. Some walked forward, then suddenly rewound, their movements repeating like a broken tape. Others stood frozen, their mouths open in unheard screams. This was not the afterlife. This was something worse. This was the Karn Pishachini's new world. A reality built from suffering, secrets, and sins. And he was the first soul inside it. The whispering skies. As Vikram stumbled forward, a voice slithered through the air. Not in his ears. Inside his mind. Do you see what you've become? A mirror materialized in front of him. He had no reflection. Then, the whispers grew louder. Buildings shook, the streets cracked open, the sky rippled like flesh. And she emerged. Karn Pishachini. But she was no longer just a spirit, no longer a whisper. She was everything now. The air, the streets, the sky, all of it was her. You fed me well, Vikram. Her grin stretched across the entire city, her black eyes blinking from the walls of every building. And now, I will feed you to the next world. 1,000 hands erupted from the streets, grabbing him, pulling him into the ground. As he sank, he saw other faces buried in the stone, their mouths open in silent agony, their eyes begging for death that would never come. He was part of her now. Part of the cycle. The end that never ends. A new world was forming. Somewhere, another reality was beginning. Another universe was being shaped from the ashes of the last. But it would not be free. It would whisper. It would remember. And it would wait. For the next soul to listen. For the next story to be told. For her to return. And when you hear that faint voice in the dark, you will know the cycle has begun again. No wars, no bombs, no disease. Just whispers. The Karn Pishachini had consumed everything, cities, people, even the very fabric of existence. The air no longer carried human voices, only an endless, shifting chorus of secrets and sins. woven into the wind like a cursed melody. No one was left. Or so it seemed. Day 30, the false reality. Vikram Rao was alive, or at least, he thought he was. He woke up in his bunker, but something felt wrong. The walls pulsed as if breathing, the air tasted stale, metallic. The screens that once showed Earth's destruction now displayed nothing but static. Except for one. A single monitor flickered, showing a city street. But that was impossible. The world was dead. He leaned closer. It was Mumbai, bustling with life, people walking, vendors shouting, traffic honking. The world was normal. And then he saw himself. A man, standing in the middle of the street. It was him. Same face, same clothes, staring directly into the camera. Vikram's breath caught in his throat. The man on the screen raised his hand and pointed at him. Then, the screen glitched. The streets of Mumbai melted into darkness. A whisper slithered through the speakers. Did you really think you escaped, Vikram? The screen flashed back on. This time, the streets were empty. The city was abandoned, its buildings crumbling, the sky a swirling mass of black tendrils. And standing in the middle of the street was the Karn Pishachini. Grinning. Waiting. Day 45, nowhere to hide. Vikram stopped sleeping. Because every time he closed his eyes, he woke up somewhere else. One night, he opened his eyes to find himself standing in his childhood home, his mother sitting at the dining table. Her face was wrong, her smile stretched too far, her teeth too sharp. Eat your food, beta, she said. The plate in front of him was filled with rotting flesh, his own fingers and toes. He screamed himself awake only to find himself standing at the bottom of the ocean, lungs burning, shadows circling in the depths. He woke again. This time, he was in a burning village, watching people rip their own faces off. The Karn Pishachini was no longer hunting him. She was toying with him. Every reality was a nightmare, every nightmare was real. There was no escape. Day 100, the final revelation. He no longer knew if time was real. The bunker didn't exist anymore, or maybe it never had. The screens now showed endless versions of himself, trapped in infinite realities, all running, screaming, begging for escape. And then, he felt her behind him. Cold breath on his neck. You were the last, Vikram. But now, you will be the first. A clawed hand reached through his chest. But he did not die. He multiplied. His mind shattered and reformed 1,000 times over. He became part of the whispers. Part of the curse. Part of her. Now, the end that never ends. There is no world. No time. Only the whispers. Only them. And if you're reading this, it's already too late. Because you heard the story. You let it into your mind. And now, she knows everything about you. The next time you hear a whisper in the dark, don't turn around. Don't listen. Or you'll end up like Vikram. Trapped in the unending nightmare. The world was gone, not destroyed, not burned, not ruined, erased.